person join the People in Conference Now section.
Hello, and welcome to today's Telephone Town Hall. Tonight we'll be discussing the facts behind Measure 92 on your ballot this November. If you have a question at any time during the event, please press 0 to ask your question. Tonight's call will be hearing from a number of folks in our local community about Measure 92. The first one is Ruth Carey. Ruth Carey is a registered dietitian and nutritionist with over 35 years experience advising children, adults, and athletes on making healthy food choices. Ruth, welcome to the call.
Thank you, and thank you all for listening in to tonight's Teletown Hall on the importance of voting no on ballot Measure 92. As a registered dietitian and nutritionist, I have 3 concerns about this ballot measure. The first is that it provides misleading information to consumers. It won't really tell consumers which ingredients in food are GMOs or what percentage of a product is GMO. Some foods will be labeled GMO when they're not, and other foods will be exempt from this measure that do contain GMOs. My second concern is that consumers will have a higher cost for their groceries. And as a nutritionist, in the state of Oregon, where we have a high degree of food insecurity, having higher costs for groceries with no benefit back in terms of better nutrition concerns me. And the third is that ballot Measure 92 conflicts with existing nationwide food labeling. We already have federal labeling that labels genetically engineered food, or if people want to avoid genetically engineered food, they can purchase organic labeled foods or foods that are certified non-GMO. So I don't believe from state to state we should have different labeling laws. Thank you.
Thanks, Ruth. And again, if you're just joining us, you've joined a telephone town hall on Measure 92. Ballots are in voters' hands, and right now it's your chance to make a decision. If you have a question or a fact that you want to learn more about, you can press 0 at any time. We're really interested in hearing from you, the callers tonight, and want to have a conversation with you about the facts. Now, our second guest tonight is going to be Katie Fast. Katie is a third-generation farmer from Perrydale, where she and her husband raise seed crops and wheat. Katie is also the vice president of the Oregon Farm Bureau, advocating for 7,000 Oregon family farmers. Katie, welcome to the call.
Thank you, and thank you all for joining and listening to our concerns that we have against Measure 92. Measure 92 will put Oregon farmers at a competitive disadvantage against farmers across the country and in other nations. This is because it increases farmers and food producers' production costs. They will have to have separate segregation systems between crops to meet the regulations in 92. It also opens up Oregon farmers to third-party lawsuits from any individual that wants to challenge if their labeling is correct or not. This is probably the number one concern that I hear from farmers regarding their concerns with Measure 92. That is why almost every agricultural group in Oregon is opposing the measure, and we ask that you all join us by voting no on 92 by October 31st. And I'm looking forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Katie. And again, if you're just joining us, thank you for joining our telephone town hall on Measure 92. If you have a question at any time, press 0 to be connected with an operator to ask your question. I'd like to introduce our last guest tonight. Our last guest is Dana Beaver. Dana is an advocate with the No on 92 Coalition, which represents Oregon farmers and ranchers, consumers, businesses, and taxpayers from across the state. Dana studied public policy impacts of mandatory single-state labeling proposals such as Measure 92. Dana, welcome to the call.
Thank you. Thanks so much, everyone, for spending some time with us this evening to discuss Measure 92. As you heard Ruth and Katie talk about, this is a poorly written measure that actually doesn't tell consumers about which foods contain GMOs and which don't. And that's where it fails on its fundamental promise. And at the same time, as you heard Katie talk about, it increases the cost and regulatory and litigation burden for Oregon family farmers. But there's other reasons that Measure 92 is so flawed. It increases the cost of groceries for all Oregon families, and it does that because all food just for Oregon would have to be specially segregated and specially handled, specially packaged just for the state of Oregon, and that's where the costs go up by hundreds and hundreds of dollars a year. At the same time, it's expensive to taxpayers as well because the Department of Administrative Services has estimated it'll cost $14 million every budget cycle to enforce Measure 92, which makes sense because they have to inspect and monitor thousands of farms across the state and tens of thousands of food products and tens of thousands of stores. And there's no limited taxpayer money that can be spent, nor is there a funding source identified. So it is a costly measure. There's a reason why 13 papers across the state have all heard from both the yes and the no side, and 13 papers have urged a no vote on Measure 92. So we'll be happy to answer any questions you may have about the measure, so look forward to hearing from you this evening.
And again, if you're just joining us, you've joined a telephone town hall on Measure 92. You can press 0 on your phone at any time to ask a question. Now, we want to go to our first question tonight. This came in from Laura in Beaverton, and unfortunately she was fixing a dinner, so she couldn't stay on the line. But she had a question for Ruth. She wanted to understand more about the exemptions under this measure and what exactly is covered and what's exempt. Ruth, can you help her out?
Sure. Under this measure, there are so many exemptions, which I feel will make it very confusing to consumers. One, there'll be exemptions for packaged foods or foods to go sold by restaurants. Also, any food served in a restaurant will be exempt from this measure. So someone might go to a restaurant and order a food that has GMO and walk across the street to a grocery store, same food. It'll be labeled in the grocery store. It won't be labeled in the restaurant. That's silly to me. Also, meat and dairy products from animals fed genetically engineered feed and grain will also be exempt from this measure. So we already have an organic foods label that very clearly says that meat and dairy cannot be from animals fed genetically engineered food. So this measure just won't tell consumers what's in their food because of all these exemptions. And there'll also be some foods that contain no GMO ingredients that will be labeled GMO. So for that reason, I really encourage all to vote no on Measure 2. Get out and vote by this Friday the 31st, and encourage your friends to do so as well.
Thanks, Ruth. And again, you've joined a telephone town hall on Measure 92. Ballots are being cast right now, and it's critical to use your voice. You can check out Vote No on 92 for more information, or you can press 0 to ask your question during the call. Now we're going to go to Helen in Hillsborough. Helen has a question about who's behind the proposed measure. Helen, are you there with us?
Oh, hello there. Yes, my main thing is I voted already no. I'm totally against it. Who is behind this? Who wrote this? What is the moving force behind this very poorly written measure?
Hey, Helen, this is Dana. I'd be happy to answer your question. First of all, thank you for voting no. I appreciate that, and for mailing in your ballot. That's important. This is a close race, so we need every vote. You may remember this measure because it was back before Oregon voters years ago, and Oregon voters rejected it then. And it's really been this same out-of-state group who's been shopping this type of initiative around to states in the western half of the United States. In fact, it was in front of California voters 2 years ago, and they shot it down. And last year, Washington voters had a nearly identical measure, and they voted it down. So the group who's really behind it and funding it, it comes from this core group of folks. It's one company is called Dr. Bronner's Magic Soaps, and I swear I'm not making up that name, and that's a company out of California. Another one of the main funders to this is a company called Mercola, and they're based out of Illinois, and it's a company that sells supplements and herbal remedies and things like that. And it's interesting, the founder of that company has found himself in some hot water recently, and just for some of the claims he's made about some of his products. products. And he just has a kind of a different belief system. He's the guy who doesn't think that there should be mammograms for women, and he opposes childhood vaccines. He has a whole bunch of medical opinions that are just not shared in common science. He's one of the main funders of this, as is the Organic Consumers Fund. They have been a big proponent of these kinds of labeling measures, and they've been really clear why they want to do it. They want to move organic products to a higher market niche than it has now, and they've said publicly and clearly on many occasions they think the first way to do that is to get labeling laws. So that's who's been pushing it. They push it in other states. It's been failed in all of those states, including Oregon, and that's one of the reasons we think it deserves a no vote again this time around. So thank you again, Helen, for your no vote.
And thanks to all of you for joining the telephone town hall tonight on Measure 92. As we know from an Oregonian poll released today, the results are very close, and this measure could go either way, which makes every vote all more critical. And we really appreciate you taking the time to listen in and learn more about the measure. If you had a specific question you want to ask, of course you can press 0 at any time to ask your question. Now we're going to go to Roger in Myrtle Point. Roger had a question about the differences between GMOs and organics. Roger, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah. Hello, you hear me? This is Roger.
Yep, Roger, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was concerned. I talked to my neighbors and everything, and they're concerned about, like, on the beef. The beef has gone way up in price. The meat has, and what's the advantage of the GMOs? Say compared to organic, as far as the meat prices and the food and what's the advantage compared to organic? And is there pros and cons on it? I hear things both ways sometimes. And what is your opinion on it as far as the cost of raising food, meat in this country here?
So this is Katie, and I'm excited to answer your question, Roger. Farmers and ranchers and consumers are interested in GMOs because we can really produce less with more, more with less. Farmers are growing these crops because they have greater yields. Some are resistant to pests and diseases. We're developing new crops that are drought tolerant, which coming out of a summer like we had last year is really important. And also, many of them have consumer benefits, which is something that, we're excited to see. A potato that is non-carcinogenic when it's fried. These products are 100% safe. They've been served on trillions of meals and eaten by billions of people. There's over 2,000 studies that show that they have health benefits, no negative side effects. But for consumers out there that want to purchase non-GMO products, they can do so today under 2 labels. That's the organic standards or the non-GMO product. And those choices are available in the grocery store today. But with Measure 92, it would raise the costs on all of your grocery bills. Studies have shown that it would raise the cost up to $400 a year for a family of 4, which is something that I personally believe Oregonians can afford. And that's why I'm voting no, and I hope you do as well.
Thanks, Roger. Now, we're going to go to our first survey question tonight. It's a chance for everybody to weigh in. But again, if you are waiting to ask a question yourself, you can press 0 to be put in the queue. Now, our first question for everybody is that most people should have received their ballot. When do you plan to fill out your ballot and vote no on 92 and send it in? If you'll return it this week, press 1. If you're going to return it next week, press 2. Or if you've already returned it, press 3. As you're filling that out, just a little information. The Secretary of State's office advises that you need to send your ballot by mail on Friday if you're going to get it in time. If you don't get a chance to mail it before Friday, of course, you can drop it at one of those ballot boxes in your community. And you can go to the Secretary of State's website or plenty of news sites to learn about those locations. And even Vote No on 92 has those locations. But again, if you want it to be easy, make sure to put it in the mail by Friday. Now, to run through those questions once again, most people should have received their ballots. When do you plan to fill out your ballot and vote no on 92? If you plan to fill it out and return it this week, press 1. If you plan to return it next week, press 2. or if you've already returned it, press 3. And again, if you had a question that you'd like to ask of our panel, you can press 0 to be put in the queue and ask at any time. Now we're going to go to Richard, and Richard has an interesting question about how this affects small ranchers versus larger ranchers. Richard?
Yes, hello.
Go ahead.
Okay, well, I was concerned how this number 92 would affect the small rancher, say someone who produces less than 2 tons of product a year for general sale, versus an agri-corporation like AgriPack or somebody like that, or FlavorPack up in Eugene and the Willamette Valley. Now, obviously, they deal in thousands of tons of product. What difference do we see there? Is there preferential treatment on their side versus the small farmer? How is that going to work?
Katie, do you want to try and take that one?
Sure, I definitely can. So, Richard, I would say it's going to impact everyone, the small producers and the large producers. And depending how their operation's set up, it could impact the smaller ones even more. That's because all farmers and ranchers are going to have to do new affidavits on what they're raising and have that as part of their paperwork that they normally don't do on their farms and ranches today. However, for smaller operators who are selling at farm stands, farmers markets, or doing value-added products, making jams and jellies, or some sort of small processing on their farm, they're the ones that are subject to these third-party lawsuits. And they probably don't have the budget line items to pay for lawyers like a big corporation would. But this measure is bad no matter what size farm operation you have, and that's why you see Farmers and Ranchers United and voting no on 92.
Thank you. And now we want to go to a question from Jennifer in Salem. Unfortunately, she couldn't stay on the line, so she wanted to ask about how Measure 92 would be enforced. Dana, do you want to try and take a stab at that one?
Sure. I appreciate that question from Jennifer, and I know others may have it. Under Measure 92, there's not one but 2 new state bureaucracies that are created, and they are responsible for enforcing Measure 92. And so what they'll have to do is they will have to monitor and inspect the thousands of farms all across the state, including and then the food processors, tens of thousands of food products, and that's sold in stores all across the state to ensure compliance with this. And here's the kicker for that. Not only is that going to be hugely costly, and according to the Department of Administrative Services, it's a little over $14 million every budget cycle, but there's no funding source identified for it. So it's going to obviously then just have to come out of existing state resources. The other problem with it, though, also is there's no limit to taxpayer money that can be spent. So there's really not the checks and balances. There's no funding source. There's no limit to it, and it's just enormously costly. It's one of the many reasons that you found newspapers across the state urging a no vote, as did the Citizens Initiative Review Panel. When this group of 20 independent Oregonians sat down and analyzed Measure 92 back in August, they spent 4 days hearing from experts on both sides of the issue, and read a tremendous amount about the science and the economics behind these kinds of things. And the Citizens Initiative Review Panel at the end of the 4 days took a vote, and they urged a no vote on Measure 92. And it's for the same reasons. It's all costs and no benefits.
Thanks. And again, if you're just joining us, you've joined the Vote on 92 telephone town hall. We know that this measure is incredibly close and every vote matters, which is why we wanted to talk to you tonight. If you have any questions, anything that you're trying to make up your mind about, press 0 and ask us a question. We'd love to try and clarify that. You can also go to Vote No on 92 to learn more about the measure. I want to take another question now that's come in from Caroline in Portland. Caroline, unfortunately, was not able to stay on the line, but she said that she was interested in how consumers can already find non-GMO products in the market. Ruth, do you have any help for her?
Sure, absolutely. right now we have federal guidelines, and existing labeling provides a real reliable way for those who want non-GMO to find those products. And those two labels are either organic or certified non-GMO. And currently, there are approximately 20,000 foods in the grocery store that have one or the other label. And so one of my concerns as a dietitian about Ballot Measure 92 is it does conflict with these existing nationwide food labels that already provide a reliable way for consumers to choose non-GMO foods. We have a system in this country where federal labeling regulations, not only have a nutrition facts label on a food, but they also have an ingredient list on a food. And my concern too with Ballot Measure 92 is that the information on GMOs won't be in either of those existing forms. And consumers are used to being able to look at an ingredient label. This measure does not tell us which ingredient in the food is GMO or in what percentage. So, yes, there's already, Caroline, a real reliable way for consumers to find products that do not have GMOs.
Thanks, Ruth. And again, if you're listening and you have a question, you can press 0 to ask it at any time. Hayden has a question for us now about the funding of the measure, proponents and opponents. Hayden, why don't you go ahead?
So I noticed and researched how the opponents of Measure 92 are being funded by big companies like Monsanto Co., I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, General Mills and PepsiCo with amounts at $1.5 million and $0.6 million respectively. And the supporters of it are not seeing amounts nearly that big, and how the supporters are not big companies either.
Hi, Hayden. This is Dana. I'd be happy to answer that question for you. So, there's big money on both sides of this issue, to be sure. And in fact, you mentioned some of the funders to our campaign, and you're right about those folks. But at the same time, the Yes side has had the same types of contributors. I mean, Dr. Bronner's Magic Soaps, Mercola, Organic Consumers Fund, they've all chipped in well over $1 million as well. So there is big money on both sides of this campaign, and the reason why is there's just a tremendous amount at stake. And this is the same flawed initiative that's been going around to both all around the western half of the United States over the last few years, and it's been rejected by voters. And it's back here in Oregon. Frankly, this is really where it even started. And the reason you're going to see the funders on our campaign is because they are out protecting their customers. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about that. So really the funders to our campaign are two different kinds of groups. Number one is the seed company. It's the companies that give farmers like Katie and farmers all across the state the tools that they need to be successful. And Oregon farmers most certainly are. They're a huge economic driver in the state. And the companies that are the seed companies that are funding this, they are protecting their customers, which is Oregon family farmers. The other part of our funders group are some of the companies you mentioned. It's the food companies that have been selling food to Oregonians for generations now, and they also have a vested interest in this because Measure 92 will increase the cost of food because these food companies will have to have this special system that's just for the state of Oregon. All food has to be specially handled, specially segregated, or specially relabeled or remade just for the state of Oregon. That increased the cost. So that's the reason for the support on our funder side. And this wasn't a fight that we picked. This was a fight that was brought to us. And our commitment from day one has really just been to get the facts out to voters because we believe that the more people know about Measure 92, the less they'll like it. And that's why we urge a no vote.
Thanks for that question, Hayden. And if you have a question at any time, you can press 0 on your phone to be connected and ask it. I wanted to go back and read the poll question one more time. If you didn't get a chance to fill it out, now's your chance. And our question tonight is, most people should have received their ballots. When do you plan to fill out your ballot and vote no for 92 and send it in? If you plan to fill it out and return it this week, you can press 1. If you plan to return it next week, you can press 2. Or if you've already returned it, press 3. And just as a reminder there, Friday is the last day the Secretary of State's office advises you to mail your ballot in. If you don't get a chance to do it until this weekend or early next week, make sure you find one of those convenient drop boxes in your community to drop it off in. That way you can make sure that your voice is heard and your voice counts. Now, I want to go to Gladys in Bend. Gladys also has a question about who's supporting the measure. Gladys, do you want to go ahead?
I have a question. I found it interesting tonight when a gentleman asked who's behind this measure and who put this measure forward. We were told that it's two and possibly a third sort of obscure individuals / companies. It sounded like all were outside of Oregon. And what I found interesting is I'm looking at a flyer on No from for Measure 92, and that information isn't included in the written material. This is the first time I've ever heard that, and it's helpful information. I'm kind of curious why it wasn't provided in those flyers as well.
Hey, Gladys, this is Dana. That's a good question. I'd be happy to answer that. When we talk about Measure 92, and what we really believe from our campaign from the beginning, when we sat down and formed this coalition, which it really started with the Oregon farmers and ranchers and those in the food processing business, is talking about what this means for consumers. And you heard Ruth talk a little bit about that it doesn't actually tell you what's in your food and that it is costly. And Katie talked about the burden that it is for farmers. And we really wanted to focus on what this really means for consumers, and that's we wanted to spend the time talking about the facts and why it is harmful to farmers and costly to consumers and doesn't provide reliable information. But yeah, make no mistake, that the funders are out-of-state groups, and you'll find there's let me be really candid. There's out-of-state money on both sides of this campaign, on our side as well. But the yes side as well. They have out-of-state funders who have been funding these types of measures around the country, and they just, they don't have the vested interest like the no side funders do. I mean, the funders to our campaigns are the people who are doing business or supporting their customers here in the state of Oregon, and that's why this measure matters to them, and that's why they're urging a no vote. So hope that those of you listening will also consider all the facts and vote no on Measure 92.
Thanks, Gladys. And again, if you had a question of your own, you can press 0 at any time to ask that question. We had another person call in who wanted to know about any potential health impacts of GMOs. Ruth, do you want to talk a little bit about the studies that have been done on GMOs and their health impacts?
Sure. I can tell you, as a dietitian, boy, I've been studying nutrition for over 35 years, and GMOs have been around since about 1997. And actually, we've been eating genetically modified foods for hundreds of years. They were just modified in a little bit different way. And I know there is not one study that shows any difference between the nutritional value of a GMO or a non-GMO food. There is not a study that says they aren't safe. In fact, GMO crops are the most researched crop ever to enter our food supply, and there are over 1,700 studies that have deemed that they are safe by scientific organizations and medical groups all over the world. So we do have the studies. As a dietitian, there are foods that I feed my children, my new grandbaby, and we can all be assured that they are safe and healthful. And in many cases, like as Katie said earlier, some of these foods have increased phytonutrient value and increased nutritional value over traditional foods. So again, I just want to chime in again and say, we really hope that everyone will vote no on this poorly written measure that won't really tell consumers what's in their food.
Thanks, Ruth. And again, if you have a question at any time, you can be put in the queue to ask a question by pressing 0. We now want to go to our second poll question of the night. And our question is, what actions are you willing to take to protect Oregon consumers? Press 1 if you'll encourage friends and family to vote no on Measure 92. Press 2 if you'll write a letter to the editor about voting no on Measure 92. Press 3 if you'll share information on Facebook or Twitter about why we should vote no on 92. Press 4 if you'll do all of the above. And of course, you can press 0 at any time to ask your question during the town hall. And again, our second poll question of the night is, what actions are you willing to take to protect Oregon consumers? Press 1 if you'll encourage your friends and family to vote no on Measure 92. Press 2 if you'll write a letter to the editor about voting no on Measure 92. Press 3 if you'll share information on Facebook or Twitter about why we should vote no on Measure 92. Or press 4 if you'll do all of the above. And again, if you had a question that you'd like to ask on the town hall, you can press 0 on your phone at any time. Now I want to go to a question from Bob in Medford. Bob had a question about zero tolerance and said that he had read a number of things in the literature and about the measure, about the standards under which the labeling rules would apply. Katie, I know that's been a little confusing. Maybe you could help walk us through that?
Oh, thank you. So in the measure, the zero tolerance standard comes up under misbranding, and if there is even a tiny misstep by a farmer or a food producer, they're going to be considered misbranded, and that can be subject to $10,000 a day fines. So that's a very, very large concern for the agricultural community. And so for farmers, they're going to have to ensure that they have zero chance of commingling between products. So that means that their harvesting equipment is going to have to be either completely cleaned in between harvest times, or they're going to have separate equipment, which is hundreds of thousands of dollars, to ensure that they can meet the standards in Measure 92. That goes on to the food processing side, where they might be processing different lines that are going to, our neighboring states, and they're going to have specialized lines just for Oregon. Again, hundreds of thousands of dollars of cost to be able to put that in just for Oregon. That is why Measure 92 really hits farmers and food producers so heavily, and why we need your support in voting no this weekend.
Katie, excuse me, I'd like to add on to that a little bit, too. You hear a lot about the proponents talk about that there's other countries that have labeling laws and things. Well, there's a couple things that they don't tell you about that. Number one, there is no other country that has a labeling law like Measure 92. They're very different, and in fact, they conflict with one another. So already that's misinformation to compare the two. Secondly, notice how they talk a lot about countries. Well, Oregon is just 1/50th of a country. That's where the fundamental problem comes in. Remember earlier I was talking about how California looked at this and rejected it 2 years ago, and Washington did the same thing last year. They were nearly identical to Measure 92, but they weren't identical. So let's say that those had actually passed. Well, then you would have three neighboring states with 3 different labeling laws. The food that's sold in California couldn't be sold in Washington, that couldn't be sold in Oregon. That doesn't provide any reliable information for consumers, nor does it treat everybody equally. And that's one of the many reasons we believe that labeling standards need to be set at the federal level, like they currently are. That's where the current organic label and the non-GMO label, those are nationwide labeling systems. That way, every farmer and every food producer and every consumer is treated equally. And that's where federal labeling standards really provide a tremendous value for consumers and farmers.
Great. And want to go to a question that we've gotten, unfortunately, someone who also couldn't stay on the line, but Sarah from Clackamas wanted to ask about the right to know. She said she's been seeing a lot in the media and in the campaigns about the idea of right to know, and what did we think about that? Ruth, do you want to try and take that question?
Sure, I would be happy to. I, as a nutritionist, agree that consumers have a right to know what's in their food, and that's why I so strongly oppose this ballot Measure 92, because it is so poorly written. It'll mislead consumers about what is in their food. About 2/3 of foods that we eat would be exempt from labeling, even if they had GMOs. Also, this measure will not tell consumers which ingredient in their food has GMO or what percentage is a GMO ingredient. And that's, as Dana mentioned, that's another way that this bill is different from that in Europe. So this is not about right to know. If people want to know where GMOs or non-GMOs are, we currently have a very great federal labeling standard, and consumers who would like to avoid GMOs can do that. They just can choose the organic label, which is much more inclusive than this bill, or they can choose certified non-GMO and find tens of thousands of products available in the grocery stores today. So,
and one other thing I'll add to that, it's kind of like Ruth, it seems like the right to know, so to speak, it kind of changes. You only have the right to know when they say you have the right to know. So, for example, this is so poorly written. If I was to go to a deli and I was to buy a bag of chips and grab a can of pop, well, that's exempt, so that doesn't have a label on it. But if I go to the grocery store and I buy the exact same can of pop in the exact same little bag of chips, that does have to have a label on it. So you can see where for consumers, it's like the right to know is only there when they say you have the right to know. And because of the way this is written, it's actually kind of opposite of the way we do all of our other labeling. The way that Measure 92 is written, it means that the absence of a label means that there's no GMO in it. Well, that's where consumers really get misled. Because let's say we're in the grocery store and we're going down the aisle and we want to pick up some eggs. Well, you don't see a label on them, so you think, oh, okay, well, this wasn't made with any GMO ingredients. Well, you'd actually be wrong, because it just happens that meat and dairy products get a special exemption and they don't have to be labeled, even though they came from animals that were fed GE grains and injected with GE medications. They just happen to get one of those special exemptions. So that's where we kind of get into the misinformation, and that's what's so concerning for consumers, because I think there's two different kinds of groups of people. There's some who say, you know what, I really want to know if there's GMO in my food. I don't know what I'll do with that information, but I want to know it. This measure really fails them because you don't get a no, because you'll see the absence of a label and you'll think it's fine, but then in the back of your mind you better be thinking, I wonder if there's no GMO in it or if it got a special exemption. But then there's other consumers out there who say, I'm not concerned about whether the food contains GMOs, been eating it for 20 years, it just really isn't an issue to me. But the cost of food is an issue to them, and that's where the increased cost of groceries. And like we said, there's been studies that it'll go up by hundreds of dollars a year. I mean, it's one of the reasons the Citizens Initiative Review Panel urged a no vote on this, because it was the increased cost of groceries. So that's where, either way you look at it, whether you really think the food should be labeled and you want that information, or you don't but you're concerned about the cost of food, either way, Measure 92 fails you.
Thanks, Sarah. That was a great question. We're coming to the end of tonight's town hall, but I want to make sure that we leave you with the importance of this issue. We know from polling this measure is incredibly close. We know that each vote is going to count, and it's important for us to use our voice in this election. You have until Friday to send your ballot in the mail, and then after that you need to drop it at one of the drop locations around the state. But I want to take a minute to just hear from our panel one more time. Katie, do you want to kind of give us your concluding thoughts on the issue?
Thank you. I'd like to thank everyone for taking the time this evening to listen to this very important discussion and urge you to join Oregon's farmers and ranchers in voting no, really by October 31st, to ensure that your ballot gets in and gets counted in this very close race. Measure 92, as we've talked about, is going to be costly for Oregon farmers. It puts them at a competitive disadvantage from farmers across this nation. And Oregon agriculture is at a point where we can't afford that extra burden when we're competing against other states. And we need your support in defeating Measure 92 and look forward to a successful November 4th.
Great. Thank you, Katie. Ruth, do you want to give us your thoughts?
Sure. Again, as a registered dietitian that has been in the trenches for over 35 years, trying to teach consumers, families who want to feed their family, healthful and great foods with a budget in mind, I just have big concerns about ballot measure 92. We can't afford in this state, my clients can't, to have an increase in their grocery cost. And people that can afford organic can already find the foods that they're looking for under the organic or the non-GMO label. So I just really encourage a no vote on ballot measure 92. And please get your ballots in by this Friday, because every vote does count. so we can vote down this poorly written, misleading ballot measure that really does not tell consumers what's in their food, and in my mind, in a nutritionist, really actually causes confusion about the food label. So I really appreciate you listening in tonight. Thank you very much, and get out and vote. We appreciate your no vote. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening. I appreciate that you spent some time out of your evening to talk with us about Measure 92. And I know we've given you a lot of information about, from the campaign perspective. Here's what we think about it, but it's really not just us saying it. As I mentioned at the top of the call, there's been 13 newspapers in the state of Oregon that have heard from both the yes and the no side, and oftentimes at the same time in the same room. And those 13 papers have come out urging a no vote. I mean, it's everybody from the Portland Mercury, and their exact quote about this when they urged a no vote, as they said, referring to the yes side, they said, the essential problem is dishonesty. The Oregonian said, voters who truly value transparency and consumer choice will reject Measure 92. It's everybody, it's the Bend Bulletin that says if you accept that people need good information, this measure gives consumers inaccurate, incomplete information. So it's been independent organizations and newspapers and citizen groups that have looked at this measure and looked at it inside and out and urged that it's a no vote because it fails on its fundamental promise. So we appreciate, again, that you spent some time with us tonight talking about this, and just ask that you get out there and vote no. Like Jake has said, it's a close election. Every vote is going to matter, so please mark your ballot, mark it no, and mail it in by Halloween. And thanks again for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Dana, and the rest of our panel. Again, the power is now in your hands. You will decide the future of this measure. Make sure to use your vote and vote no. If you had a question you didn't get a chance to ask tonight, there'll be an opportunity to leave a voicemail at the end of this telephone town hall, and we'll make sure the campaign gets back to you. Join our coalition, Vote No on 92, and make sure to turn your ballot. Thank you so much. Have a great night.